All right. Rose, you are up.
Kick it off? Okay, so I'm standing in for Heather. So pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Somerville Community Preservation Committee will be conducted via remote participation. You will have a video recording available upon request as soon as possible after the meeting. So we're going to jump in and start, make our way through the agenda. Should I just make a note, Roberta, about the meeting minutes that we'll do those at the end under?
And as you're, so you're calling the meeting to order Wednesday, July 26, 2023 for the Community Preservation Committee, and Rose White is standing in as chair this evening because the chair, Heather Highmark, is not able to be with us. So go ahead.
Thank you. We're going to circle back. We're doing our meeting minutes a little out of order. We're going to do them at the end of the agenda. And we'll start the meeting. Our first agenda item is an update, a recommendation update on the art farm project. And
so I'll provide a little bit of an intro to this. Back in 2019, the committee recommended funding for Art Farm, a project to create a new park in East Somerville. And we had an update given to us for those of us, there are several new committee members who weren't here in January when we received an update from Richard Raish. And at the time, it was determined that he gave us an update of the project, and we determined that the committee may or may not want to update its recommendation that was given in 2019, depending on how the current iteration of the project compares to the original recommendation from 2019, or what was originally applied for when the CPC made its recommendation. And I had not, back in January, included the original application in the meeting packet. So now we have all of the material to compare, and it's for the committee to provide, to consider whether or not a change in the recommendation is needed. And we have Rich back with us again to answer any questions that the committee has. Thank you. Did you want to say a few words yourself in introduction to this?
Thank you, Roberta. Yeah, so the presentation that we gave back in January, everything is still on target from that. Since that January date, we have broken ground on the Poplar Street pump station, which is now our precursor project, as described last time around. The pump station includes a very large underground tank. So we need to construct that underground tank first, and then we'll construct Art Farm atop that. We're still on target with that project. We're digging now. And as I described in January, the intent will be to line up the construction timelines. We'll go to City Council for additional design funds, for final design funds late this year, and then spend 2024 completing the final design documentation for the art farm with the intent of breaking ground in first thing in 2025 for construction of it. Generally speaking, like nothing has changed in terms of the program or in terms of what's envisioned for Art Farm. We just need to bring those documents to final completion so that we can construct it. It is likely we'll have to change the locations of some of the things in reaction to the way that the tank is built. But generally, those are just sort of details on exactly what might go where on the plan view. But in general, the program is still all the same. The overall CIP that was presented to City Council in March reflects that plan and that timeline. And I would point out that the overall financial modeling for the CIP was dependent on the $1 million from the Community Preservation Act to make the art farm finances balance with all the other competing goals that the city has. Building repairs, schools, paving roads, other parks. So, you know, the $1 million commitment from CPA is still very important in terms of the city's overall finances and how we do the financial modeling and discuss the project with City Council for the city's portion of the funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Rage from the committee members?
Sure, this might be an idiot question, but so the original allotment of $1 million, I guess it's a collection of funds from their category and from some assumed bonding and things like that. So that amount remains the same. That even though it's 4 years later, that's the same request there.
Yes, in January, I'm sorry. In January, we had some discussion about whether to change that amount or whether to change the allocation between the different reserves and bonding. And at the time, the committee felt that there wasn't any need to change the allocation and that they still supported the $1 million. So the question was whether the description of the project had changed. And my own review of the application materials, I don't feel that the description of the project has changed. But I would defer to the committee members if you have questions about the description of the project, or if you want to reconsider the allocation between the funding areas.
I have a question for you, I think. First, I'll say, in my opinion, yes, the description doesn't seem to have changed. The CPC goals being targeted remain the same. The design seems to check all the boxes that I know of for the CPC goals. So I have no problem on that front. This money is not to come out of this year's allocation since it was previously approved in another fiscal year's budget, correct?
Correct. We've been carrying forward like this money in reserve until it's actually been used.
And also this is, we do the bonding, the funds to service the bonds do come out of this year's allocation. Isn't that right, Roberta?
The bond will probably not be drawn until next year, and so we would not expect the first bond payments until next year.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, how does it work when the bonding, the interest rates have jumped up quite a bit? How does that work? Reduce the amount that they end up getting, or do we end up having to pay more in bonding for this?
I think it will increase the annual bond payments. Alan, perhaps you can answer the question.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. So it won't change any commitment we've made. It will just decrease. You know, we allocate the debt at the beginning of each year. So in future years, there will just be less funding to allocate to new projects because we'll have a higher interest cost, a higher budgeted interest cost off the bat. And we won't know the exact interest rate until we actually go to market. So, and to Roberta's point, we won't actually begin any bond payments or go out to market until the project is started and we've started paying invoices first.
The money allocated to this project from the budgeted reserve, is that also already been allocated from the budgeted reserve, or is that an additional drawdown of the budget reserve?
No, we've been holding this money
The whole $1 billion.
for this purpose all along. So we've been carrying forward these funds from 2019.
So maybe the funding recommendation in your draft document should kind of reflect, or can reflect, that this is money, from 2019 or 18 or whatever year it was. Because to my eye, it read like current money.
The money is sitting in the same reserve account, whether it was entered into that reserve account in 2019 or in 2023. It's the same account. So for city council's purpose, it will come out of the same account.
Yeah, okay.
And one thing I'm wondering is, given so many years have passed, if the art farm, like if they feel that this budget is realistic because of expenses that may have gone up due to COVID shortages, supply shortages, and that kind of thing, if that's been examined at all.
Yeah, we don't have an updated cost estimate as of right now. We likely won't do that until 2024 when we start revising the design. However, anecdotally, I will be able to tell you that indeed the prices for construction across the board have increased significantly. At this point in time, it has not been our intent to ask the CPC for additional funds beyond what's already been committed. That cost escalation, our plan has been to have the city side finance that. So that the city share of the overall project costs will be increasing. And that was what we modeled last year when we presented the overall capital investment plan to the city council. We estimated what the escalation would be and just increase the city share, just reserving the $1 million on CPA.
I see. Okay. Well, that's reassuring.
I just have one question about, so overall timing, I can't remember. I'm just looking back at the application. What's the total? It's done, construction is done by 2025?
Yeah, but we're projecting that, by the time we're done with the tank, not only does the tank itself, but it does a lot of the enabling for the site. So then the actual construction of the art farm portion of it is easier than it would have been had we not been doing all that construction, that site enabling. So we think it's realistic that starting first thing in 2025, that we would have it completed by the end of 2025 and be able to open it. The only caveat that I would put on that is, because there are various plantings and vegetation, it might be that there's portions of it that we wouldn't want to open or let the public on until the spring growing season of 2026. But generally, the hardscapes and all that portion would be open and available by the end of 2025.
I would invite the committee the committee members to suggest whether to just to return or ask that the city council take up the original recommendation, or if we want to submit a new recommendation. That I have provided a draft recommendation letter in the meeting packet, which the only difference right now is that it is a little more succinct than the original recommendation letter. I've taken out some of the language that was originally included. That's the only change that I've shown, unless committee members wanted to suggest any other changes, or if you feel that it's fine without making any changes.
I thought it was fine as it was. I noticed that it was pretty much identical to the 19 one, and So I mean, I could just go ahead and make a motion that we pass, so that we fund or keep the funding as it was, right?
I did note one typo in the
In the
first
new
paragraph,
or original recommendation?
in the revised one.
So if we don't
Oh,
have
well,
to use
actually,
the
even the
revised,
revised one's sold. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong one.
and you may, it may be the committee's desire not to use the revised recommendation at all.
I'm sorry. So which is the document I should be looking at?
Roberta,
So
will you
there,
just go through and
in the
highlight
meeting
what
packet, so in the meeting packet, there is FY19, the Art Farm CPC funding recommendation FY19, and
Yeah.
then there's the Art Farm CPC funding recommendation revised.
Right, which has a January date, if I'm reading it right.
Because that was in January that I originally prepared it, so I would obviously update that to today's date if, interestingly, I'm looking at one that has a July date, but no matter, I would use the July date if you wanted to change anything in the recommendation.
Well,
But if you
no
don't want to
matter,
make any substantive changes, then we don't need to make
yeah. Well, one change we might want is to change the description, the project description from Art Barn to Art Farm.
I think there are two different things. The art barn is on the art farm.
Oh,
Is that
there is? Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I thought it was just a typo.
So do we need, can we just go with a look for our recommendation is to go with the original recommendation? Do we need a motion to go with the original recommendation?
I think that's, Laura made that motion.
Okay.
Laura made that and I'll second it.
All right, thanks, and I will call the roll.
Can we discuss that?
I'm sorry?
The revised one has the funding conditions that we've been putting in all new approvals. That project has to start within 3 years.
That is true. That is one difference. I added the condition, the CPA funded portion must be initiated within 3 years unless an extension is granted by the CPC. So that is a new condition that we added this year. That is one substantive difference between the original and the revised. The other two conditions are older ones. What's that?
I will not vote for the version without that.
Okay.
All right, let me just jump in. It seems like we've got some back, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm hearing a bunch of background noise. I'm not sure where.
I'm hearing that too.
Oh, that's better. I'm not sure what happened.
I think it was I have a little fan, or had it on, and I think it was getting picked up.
Thank you. I hope it doesn't get too hot.
Yeah.
So my apology that I'm not the expert in Robert's rules. So we had a motion seconded to keep the old recommendation, but now there's on further discussion, David Turin preferred the updated, the new updated recommendation.
Can I clarify? Sorry, may I make clarification real quick? Laura, correct me if I'm wrong. You were proposing the original allocations of dollars and splits, but within the revised letter, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, I'm looking at the one that says revised 125-23, which includes the language David feels strongly about. But it has the original allocations is what I'm getting at, which are highlighted in yellow.
Understood.
Yeah.
So I'm going to clarify that Laura made a motion to update the recommendation to the current language with the conditions stated in the revised recommendation.
Could I also include a second condition? I like how there's the measures of success in the original document. I feel like that's an important aspect to continue into this document. Could that also just be included?
You'd like to bring forward the measures of success?
Yeah, they're not included in the revised version, and I
Okay.
think that's a helpful thing to include. I don't know if the project budget is also could be updated or not and included, but the measures of success was the key one for me.
I want to jump in. I think we did talk about that, and I think one of the issues with the including the measures of success was that we're not really set up to do the monitoring or there is no mechanism to monitor, and so for that reason, we felt like it was good in theory. The measure, having a measure of success as a deliverable is good in theory, but that this committee is not really set up to sort of review and have there be a follow-up action.
Yeah, to hold it accountable. Yeah, that makes sense.
Am I remembering that correctly? The rest of the committee members, I feel like that was sort of why it didn't get carried over from the original.
Yes, that's definitely correct, and to the best of my recollection, I agree.
Okay, scratch that from the record.
It's in the record. I do have a question though about that first measurable success. Does this project actually increase open space acreage in Somerville?
Essentially, yes, because it activates space that is otherwise unusable.
But is it considered open space under the city's definition of it?
Yes. Yeah.
That actually does raise one question that I had in the back of my mind, which is, should the art barn be subtracted from the amount of open space that we're creating?
It's an interesting question. I guess it depends upon what the final design of the art barn is. Like I really just think of this as art farm, and the barn portion of it is just an amenity on it. I don't know that I don't know the answer to your exact question.
Is the art barn, the idea is that the art barn is part of it's open to the public, it's usable space, and I think because of that, I don't know, I look to Roberta, your expertise on whether I thought open space had a broader definition and could include, it's not necessarily just outdoor space, it's public space. Am I wrong about that?
It is a philosophical question about, is this 2.1 acres of open space or something less than 2.1 acres?
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a correct choice in 2019 to exclude Art Barn from CPA funding. But I don't think that Art Barn disqualifies the project in general. I think, like this, as you say, this is creating new public space, and much of it is going to be open space and recreation. So it's eligible, certainly.
Do we have to say in this that it's creating 2.1 acres of public, or can we say it's a 2.1 acre site which will, include X, Y, and Z?
That might be more accurate.
And then let the final plan determine how much of it is open space.
Yeah. So I can change it to say Art Farm will provide new open space on a 2.1 acre site.
I'm more comfortable with that. And then let the final design and the city determine how much of it is actually open space.
Yeah, that sidesteps our philosophical puzzle. All right, so with that,
sorry, not to beat a dead horse, but I do actually think that this is maybe we want credit for this also, for the barn being included in this. Maybe we don't want to exclude the barn from this space. If it's open space / recreation, why have our CPC funds limited to just the open space? Unless there's a reason, some other reason that the funds don't follow, that the funds can't be used for the barn.
Yeah, I think that the CPA legislation doesn't make space for CPA to fund the construction of the barn. Although, as I said, I don't think that, I mean, the fact that the entire site is becoming open space with the barn, I don't think that that the barn disqualifies the site from CPA funding. We just can't we can't use the funds to construct the barn itself, but you're putting so much additional city funding from other sources into the project that the CPA funds can go toward the portions of the site that are eligible without any controversy.
Okay.
So there's a motion to update the funding recommendation with slightly modified language in the description, and seconded by the motion by Laura, seconded by Ryan. I will call the roll. John?
Yes.
Rose?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Jahan?
Yes.
Laura?
Yep, I made the motion.
David?
Yes.
And Ryan?
Yes.
All right, motion passes. Thank
Thank
you.
you all. Have a good evening, everybody.
Good night.
You're not going to stay for the whole meeting?
All right.
Okay. Should I move us on to the next agenda item? Is that good, Roberta?
Yes, sure. We have off-cycle funding requests for 3 projects. And as I introduced the 3 projects, I also wanted to point out that these are included in a list of projects that are have been requested, including all of the eligibility determination forms and these off-cycle funding requests that's provided in the meeting packet. I'm just opening that myself so that I can refer to it. So that you can see these projects in the context of all of the projects that you can anticipate for this year. And with that, I'd like to invite Arne Franzen to talk about the 2 projects that he is requesting for off-cycle funding requests.
Hello, everybody. I think some of you know me. My name is Arne Franzen. I'm a project manager with the Department of Public Space, Urban Forestry. As Roberta said, I'm coming to the CPC with 2 priority off-cycle requests. They're the Brown Schoolyard and Henry Hansen Park. Both projects have been before the CPC earlier. CPC funded the design for the Brown Schoolyard, and CPC funded provided construction funds for Henry Hansen Park. The first one before us is the Brown Schoolyard. This is I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Brown Schoolyard. It is the oldest school building in Somerville, built in 1900. And I think when the CPC approved the design, the proposal at that time was to renovate both the Brown and the West Somerville Neighborhood School schoolyards. Both those projects are under construction right now. And the story with the West is proceeding. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that. I don't know at any time. The Brown is a project that has gone forward in fits and starts. And so there was a significant community process that was underway before the COVID pandemic hit. It then went into suspension for the better part of a year. Because of the COVID pandemic, the city had to take a step back and look at a lot of the school buildings. And that triggered a process by which the people put a real magnifying glass on several issues at the Brown. And because there was like this unknown, several unknown aspects of the Brown and the future of the school as to whether the building envelope would change or whether the building would stay as the school, the future of the schoolyard became an unknown. You can imagine that if they renovated the school and had to provide like a new elevator for ADA access, or if they wanted to expand the school in some way. And one of the issues at the Brown is that there's no indoor recreation space. It is an old building. There's no gymnasium. There's no cafeteria. There's no space within the building for any sort of active recreation. I mean, in cold weather, kids play in the hallway, or they, all adapt classroom space for some sort of like PE activity. So the outdoor space, the schoolyard, was critical. When the community understood that the city was, was postponing the design of the schoolyard, the community, they were upset. Because the city had said, because we don't know what the future of the school is, we want to hold off until we make that further determination before we design the schoolyard. The community came back in a big way and said, that this is an unknown. We accept that we don't know what the future of the Brown is. Doesn't change the fact that our kids need a much better schoolyard than was there currently. And that space was just an cracked asphalt, broken up space with poor drainage, didn't meet ADA requirements. And so while the grand design for that schoolyard was more elaborate, the parents came back and said, just want to have a better space. Give us a better space than we have now. Certainly the city can do that. Administration agreed, and we produced a design and went out to bid with that over a year ago. And at that time, because of the scheduling of that process, it was clear that the construction wasn't going to happen until late August and early September, at which point it would have been under construction while the kids needed to use the space. And the school and the community pushed back and said, no, this is not appropriate either. We'd like to see some minor changes, some changes to that space, and it should be done during the summer when it doesn't impact the students. Because I'm sorry if this is more information than you wanted to know, but this is sort of the background. So one of the things that the city had requested in the beginning to the whole process that they came back to us with, this is both community members, PTA, and the school principal, said they wanted to have some sort of small field space, not just an asphalt surface, because the design we were providing was largely just a new asphalt surface that was level, met ADA requirements, and would have a lot of graphics on it. And we pushed back and said we would like to have a small turf space. So we redeveloped the design, incorporated a small turf space in it, and then put the project back out to bid this spring, knowing that we had to have it under construction the day that school let out, June 20th. That process went well. I mean, in terms of like the way we finished the design and got it out to bid. Unfortunately, like a lot of projects, since the COVID pandemic, prices from the contractors were high. We've seen that the year before, and then this spring, the prices came back high. We had one contractor who could do the project within our budget, but there was very little money left over for any unknowns which come up. Typically, when you have a construction project, you want to allow a reasonable contingency. We didn't have much contingency at the Brown, and then shortly after we started construction, the first week, we were doing the demolition of the schoolyard, and we just hit a bunch of unknowns, and just issues just continued to pile up. And so when we add up the costs for those problems and other future problems or unknowns, we realized that we were quickly eating up our contingency, and we were going to go through our budget. We were going to be beyond our budget needs. And so that's why we're coming back to the CPC to ask for construction funds. Because the CPC had funded the design of the Brown and had not awarded any money to the construction, it was determined that we needed to do a full application. And so the application, the off-cycle application for the Brown is the full application. So that would be the difference between that and the upcoming Hanson request. So you'll see that in your package with the explanation of the costs. Our request is for, we have it, is for $96,000, essentially $97,000 to ensure that we get this project over the finish line. We are on a tight schedule. Like I said, when we issued our contract, we required that the vendor start June 20th, the day after school got out, and we are requiring them to have the project complete by August 25th. The work at the Brown included the schoolyard, but because all the water facilities at the Brown, including the downspouts and the stormwater system, were out of code, we were also required to update that system and put a new sewer system on Josephine Street. Josephine has a combined sewer, which is illegal if you're making a change to public municipal facility. You've got to make sure that it has a separated sewer. So that became a part of our project as well. So our $97,000 request is to address the unknowns, which we've already come up on, and then we're allowing ourselves a contingency for anything else that comes up. I think one of the issues is obviously just a very high cost of construction these days, but also the fact that we are dealing with a very old building and facility, and construction, you could argue as to whether the city should have done better maintenance of that building and the grounds over the years. Would that have changed things? But part of it is just the fact that it is a very old building. So the things we ran into were like, mystery conduits underneath the asphalt. The fact that the asphalt, which you would expect to be a few inches thick, was as much as like 14 inches thick or greater, and was the old style of asphalt, which had a full oil base, which you cannot dispose of in a normal recycling facility. So there were just a series of those issues that came up. But again, we're trying to address those cost overruns and future possibilities with this request. A couple more points. If we do find that that the 97,000 is in excess of our needs, we will certainly return those funds to the CPC. The other issue that I wanted to point out is that one of the guidelines of CPC funds or CPA funds is that those funds cannot be used for turf. That was a determination of the CPC. So you cannot use CPC funds for the design or the construction of a turf field. So that is an important part of this design. But that is one component of the design. So we have enough funding within the project budget to address the turf field with our ARPA funds. And so there's no reason to think that the CPC funds would go towards that. That's the broad paintbrush approach. So sorry if I rambled on a little bit. If I can answer any questions, please let me know.
Questions? Rose?
Sorry, Rose, you're muted.
Sorry. That's a great overview. That application is so easy to work through. I appreciate that format. So one quick question. I know that the ARPA funds are the two sources of funding, are CPC funds and ARPA funds. I'm assuming that there aren't more ARPA funds available. Is that right? ARPA funds, that was a one-time deal, and okay.
I can illuminate that a little bit more. When we first started putting together the budget for the Brown, we put in an ARPA request. We then seen the way construction costs were going. Early in the ARPA process, we had the opportunity to request additional funds, and we did that. So we've already requested, we have 2 ARPA requests in, but when we started exploring options for additional funding, it was made clear by the city, now a few months ago, that there is no more ARPA money available. It is all dedicated to other projects.
Okay.
Do we have any information or indications about in the bigger picture what might happen to Brown, the likelihood that it might close? Isn't that on the table as a possibility?
Lord, there are so many questions about the Brown, and I can't say what they are. I mean, Rich, if you're still there, you're welcome to jump in. Rich has been a part of that decision-making process as well. I think that it remains an unknown. The Brown is one of the most desirable schools in the city, in spite of the fact that it has some of the poorest facilities.
Yeah.
And I believe that many aspects of the building are out of code and need repair. But we're able to focus on this one aspect of it and improve the quality of the recreation and educational environment for the kids. So that's our goal.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just say, well, I'm curious about this. I also think that, that neighborhood, as all the neighborhoods in Somerville, can use a park. So if ultimately the school closed, there would still be a playground that is usable in that neighborhood, which is, all streets and asphalt other than that until you get to the bike path. And yeah, so a new playground is welcome with or without the school there, is what I'd say.
I think that's a great point, and we've seen that even I know I know that the CPC is not funding turf spaces, but the turf spaces that have been developed in the city and at various other schoolyards have seen immediate use by the recreation programs as practice spaces and for other uses. In the same way that there's basketball courts there as well. And we always see, like, if you go to any school or any park that's got basketball facilities, you always see them being used after hours and on weekends.
Are there any limitations on the use of open space funding for this sort of infrastructure work?
David, you have to clarify your question.
I think.
Well, replacing stormwater and sewer pipes and so forth with open space funding.
So I'll jump in and answer that. Is creating the infrastructure that underlies the park, as long as this is being used to facilitate the creation of open space or the improvement of open space, we can fund infrastructure as long as it's not for an excluded purpose. And as Arn mentioned earlier, turf fields are an excluded purpose under the CPA legislation. So we can't fund the infrastructure that supports the turf field, but the costs associated with the allowable portions of the open space or the recreation area, the CPA can fund.
And how can I tell from this application that apportionment has been done? You know, that this is not funding infrastructure that supports the turf field.
If there's nothing in that determines that. I mean, it's true that, so when the funds are allocated, assuming the funds are allocated and city council approves it, they will go into my larger project budget. But given the breakout of the budget, the cost for the field improvements, I mean, there's enough money within my existing budget to cover all of those costs. So I think that these are
So the unforeseen costs that you as described in this attachment don't have to do with the artificial turf field.
No, they don't. They don't. I could, you know, give you a little more background. I mean, one of the initial, in addition to like the additional material that we saw underground in terms of like the incredibly thick layers of asphalt, unknown conduits that had to be explored. We also had large tree roots coming in from an abutter's property. There's a very tall fence at the back of the schoolyard, and there's a tree on the abutter's property on the other side. And when we went to excavate and to lower, if the schoolyard is pitched, right? And so we wanted to lower it to make it ADA accessible. So we had to lower the grade at the back side of it. So that meant that the area at the base of that fence, where there was a low retaining wall, all had to go down about 2 feet. In doing so, we realized that we were going to be exposing tree roots and possibly endangering the health of the abutter's tree. So we had to change the design of the field so that there is now a raised portion that goes all the way around those tree roots. It actually is working to the benefit of the design, because there'll now be like a raised deck area in the middle of the schoolyard for kids to hang out on. But it was that sort of like an unforeseen thing. We didn't recognize the fact that when we went down 2 feet, that there were, you know, going to be the tree roots that we encountered. In addition to the fact that it's amazing when you get into an older, whether it's a schoolyard or older building, the concrete that was used, or the way the amount of concrete that was used on things is really questionable. The footings, and for a lot of the wall footings, the chain link post footings are all crumbling. Things that you think you'll be able to reuse were just like, you know, just crumbling. So we're just like having to replace a lot more of that concrete than anybody anticipated.
So to be clear, I mean, part of my concern about, about this request is, that the open space money that we have is so limited that I really would like, the city to be very aggressive with regard to looking for alternatives, then coming back to us for additional open space money. I did hear, that you say that, the ARPA money is fully allocated, but I also see that there's an ongoing funding cycle that's open right now for ARPA, for ARPA applications, which suggests that, to me at least, that there might be additional money that the city could allocate to this.
I can't speak to what the ARPA manager, how the ARPA manager would respond to that. I believe that request was for a request from the community to address specific community issues, or to open that, that pot of money, whatever that was. I can't remember what the total was, up to the community. As a project manager for the city, and city staff was told that the money that was provided for our construction projects is capped. Those projects, I mean, those ARPA funds which were committed are all we're allowed, just simply because they've been committed to other things. I appreciate your question, David. It's a good question. It's a tough situation. I think we get the construction costs have been coming in very high. We were in anticipation of potential high costs. We were able to increase our ARPA funding. We did go back to ARPA and we got additional money. So that was good. It's just that the combination of the high construction costs that came in and when we had our project out to bid and these unknowns is what is our problem. And again, you know, if we have additional, if we don't need all of this money because some of this budget is for unknowns, then we'll certainly return it to the CPC. So that's, you know, happy to do that.
I do have one question about the turf field. So it looks like in your line item, the only thing that's really that we can't use CPA funding for is line item 6, the cast in place wall and platform, including turf, for about $13,000.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? So that little platform that we were talking about. So we've got, you know, a wall, like a, you know, a four-sided wall, concrete on all 4 sides, that's raised about 2 feet now. So it acts as a little deck space. And we were trying to find material to put on top of that the kids could sit on. And we explored different possibilities. While it would be nice to have a wood deck there, that was expensive. Another option would be to put asphalt up there. We thought that was less desirable. And so turf became an option for that. So there will be turf on top of that space.
I would say, I think, I mean, in my mind, this gets lumped in, this increase gets lumped in with the original CPC award. And that this is, you know, if you look at the breakdown of CPC funds that are funding the project versus ARPA funds, there is a lot more scope that's CPC eligible than the dollars that we actually have in the project. And so we should sort of not get, my recommendation is that we don't get hung up on is this going through line item by line item on this unforeseen costs, because it in general, the project has got plenty of costs to be to cover the, am I saying this right? Plenty of costs that are CPC eligible. And we don't have to sort of break it out into the original award and then the addition.
Right.
Something else that we can do. So if the CPC awards the funds and City Council approves, there will be a new purchase order created for those funds. That will be a separate purchase order from the purchase order we already have, right? So then when I get my invoices from the vendor, then we can say to the finance department, these items are paid with this purchase order and these items are paid with that purchase order. Just, you know, just to be very specific about, so there's no confusion about any of the turf items being paid for with the CPC purchase order.
Yeah.
Robert, I have one question for you about turf, because my previous job, I did a lot of like sports fields designs for like different towns around Massachusetts. And the comment was always that you can't use CPA funds for the actual like turf mat, but you could use CPA funds for everything below that. Do you know if that's true or have any clarification on that?
That is not the case. That is not the case in Somerville. It's not for the design of the turf field. It's not for any aspect of the construction.
Okay.
There was actually a court
CPC
decision
design-
a couple of years ago where it was decided that the town could not use, the town had intended to use CPA funds for the construction of the underlay, but not the actual turf mat. And that was determined to be not in the spirit of the CPA legislation.
That makes sense. Great.
And
Thank you for
with
that.
regards to this project, I mean, the initial design of requests from the community for both the Brown and the West were for those schoolyard designs to include turf spaces. So when we came to the CPC and requested design funds, the CPC said, no, we can't have funds for the design of the turf spaces. So we took that piece out and we went to the city council and requested a separate bond to cover the design of the turf spaces for both projects. So CPC provided the majority of the design funds for both schoolyards, but then there was a larger bond, citywide bond for turf spaces at several different locations. And the design funds for these two schools were wrapped into that larger bond.
That makes sense. Thank you both for that clarification.
So I just wanted to point out that I did not think to include in the meeting packet for these 3 off-cycle applications draft recommendation letters. So one thing that I wanted to ask for clarification from you, Arn, on the Brown School project is that the first page of the application requests $97,000. And then the budget and your memorandum show, I think, 96,754. So we need to pick a number to ask for a motion to recommend.
I'm happy with whichever the CPC wants. I just rounded up for the sake of, easy financing.
But it's the choice of the committee then to pick a number. And then I can share a screen that shows what the like the important points are that will be included in the recommendation letter, which I'll draft after the fact.
I
Do
have a,
we motion? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm struggling to understand the numbers on that attachment. And I'm not a numbers person, or can you just really quickly walk through how you got to the 96, 754?
Sure.
I was trying to like do math on the side and recreate that number, and I couldn't figure out what numbers added together to make that.
Yeah, David, I'm sorry. It was not, I started with a spreadsheet, my own spreadsheet, and just used that when I submitted it. So if you have the spreadsheet in front of you.
Yeah, well, I have the one page
Right.
summary.
So the first number was the 160. The top
Yeah.
of the page, 160. Yeah. That was the CPC design funds. That's not a part of the project. So the construction funds that we had, the ARPA construction funds we had available is the 824, 418. Right. The contract came in at 772, 616, leaving me a contingency of 51,802. Then the next series of costs, all the costs, the deductions were in parentheses. The next series of costs were the things that we talked about, everything from the roots to the crumbling concrete, that sort of thing. So the total of those costs on the right side was the 92,556.
Yeah.
So we also anticipate additional police detail costs. And I've included a large contingency for potential excavation, unknowns on Josephine Street. So if you add the 92, the 6, and the 50, you get the 148,556.
Yeah.
So you combine that negative value with the 50 that we had above, and the balance is,
So the
the
one,
negative balance is
so
the
the
90.
148,556 minus the 52 something,
Yes,
the 96.
148.56 minus the 51.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So none of that factors in the CPC money that's already been allocated.
That's correct.
Okay.
The design contract is fine and is not an issue.
Thank you. Because I was doing all sorts of random math trying to make that number and I couldn't get
Yeah,
there.
and I'm sorry, and I think that I just before the meeting, I took a quick look at the Hanson spreadsheet, and it's similar. It's just a, might need a little explanation.
Okay. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Is there a motion?
I can motion for an easy 97,000.
I'll second that.
All right. So I'll call the roll and then we can discuss the conditions. John,
Yes.
Rose,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
and David,
Yes.
and Ryan.
Yes.
All right. Motion passes. And I have on the screen the same conditions that were applied in the Art Farm updated recommendation. And so I'd like to ask if you would want to include these conditions in the recommendation, and if you or if you'd like to discuss any other conditions to apply.
I did appreciate Aaron's offer to kind of do bookkeeping that shows that the CPC money is only used for CPC eligible stuff. Do we normally get that sort of level of a financial report, or is that something that
Typically, excuse me, through you, Roberta, when we have a project, the POs are typically amalgamated into like a larger budget, and then you pay out of a PO that's currently open. That doesn't change it, but I can still be more specific when I get an invoice and ask in the finance department to pay related items out of a separate PO. So that's something that I can do, and then presumably I can provide some sort of record for that.
And so would we routinely get a sort of financial report, Roberta, or is that something?
So I don't usually provide a financial report to the committee for ongoing projects. I provide the budget at the time of the application, and then I administratively monitor the projects as they're under construction to ensure that the funds are being used for eligible costs.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that.
Okay.
Roberta, given the, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say, given that the majority of this request is for contingency, could we put in a condition that any unspent contingency funds are returned to the CPA?
Ryan, I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to say the same exact thing, if it's possible.
Okay. Um,
Do we need a motion to accept these conditions? Or don't, no motion?
yes, we do. We need a motion to apply these conditions to the recommendation.
I'll make a motion that we apply these conditions to the recommendation.
I can second that.
And I will call the roll. John,
Yes.
Rose,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jahan,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
Ryan,
Yes.
and David.
Yes.
And the motion passes. All right, so we can move then from the Brown School to Hanson. And again, Arn will give us an introduction.
Yes, everybody, thank you very much for your support of the Brown. Really appreciate it. This is an active construction project, and so being able to communicate to my vendors that we have a likely funding source will put them at ease, as well as the rest of city staff. So thank you. The next project is the Henry Hansen Park. This is a much larger request. The CPC has already awarded funds to Henry Hansen twice. CPC, Henry Hansen initially came to CPC, not 100% sure, and I think it's, I have it in the memo that I sent to you guys. 2017, I think, the CPC awarded design funds to Veteran Services so that they could redevelop Henry Hansen Park as a Veterans Memorial Park, specifically honoring Henry Hansen, veteran of the UG, Somerville citizen. You know, it's a great sentiment and way to honor this citizen and all the armed forces. So that was the idea that Veteran Services was pushing. They hired a landscape architect and headed a community process and came up with a design. That design process had not been completed when the director of Veteran Services left the city for a position in Boston. The project then sat for a few years with no activity. There was a new director of Veteran Services hired, and we had a couple of conversations with him, sort of like asking him how he wanted to follow up on the project, because public space urban forestry had played a role in it, and we just wanted to know how Veteran Services wanted to proceed. Veteran Services said they did want to proceed, and they thought it was a good project, and there's been a lot of input from veterans pushing for it, as well as former city councilors. So public space urban forestry came back to CPC, and we requested additional money to, or we requested funds to reactivate that design. CPC agreed. And the design contract with CBA Landscape Architects has been amended, and those plans and specifications are now complete. We then came back to CPC and requested $350,000 towards construction. A good portion of that 350 was also to match a park grant request that we had. We had submitted a park grant request to the Department of Conservation Services with the state. So we had our park grant, and we had our CPC funds, and we had our budget of like $725 for construction. And we were pretty happy with ourselves. We thought, okay, we've done this well. We have the funds that we need. It's now, but we realized that our construction estimates, we put them together for this project, were based on old numbers provided by the landscape architect, some of them going back to, the original design numbers that they were projecting. So I am afraid that we're going to get into the same problem with Henry Hansen that we've gotten into on other projects. We're going to put it out to bid, and bids will come in higher than our budget will allow for. So I want to take a very safe approach to this project. I want to ensure that it goes forward and that we can complete it and, you know, as it was intended. So this is a larger request. I've talked to our landscape architects, and we're both, you know, CBA and the city agree that the funding that we have in place is likely to be, very likely to be low, especially given the project that, you know, what we saw at the Brown Schoolyard, which is a pretty straightforward project. I mean, the Brown Schoolyard project is straightforward. It's asphalt and grading, and there's not a lot of finesse to it. You just have to have a contractor who could, a good contractor who could do that work. Henry Hansen, while the smallest place, is detailed work, and it has a lot of different components in it. And I'm concerned that the budget that we had is going to be dramatically under what the project will cost. I admit that this space is small, and so I don't have a price per square foot for you. If we looked at that number, it would be scary. But I feel like if this project is to go forward through completion, we need to have a good budget in place. So I've gone through the budget myself and put together the budget that I proposed, sort of like based upon my experience and what we've seen in other projects in terms of where costs are coming in on concrete or utilities or just materials. Material costs are just sky high everywhere, just scary high. I mean, things that you would have thought would be inexpensive are now very high. The cost of a piece of granite per street is like extremely high. There's just little things across the board that continue to add up. So the request here is for $411,776. That's the number that I put in. I mean, if we wanted to round up to 412, that would be fine. Because the CPC has already awarded construction funds to Henry Hansen, a full application was not required. So therefore, the submission here is a memo, asking you to take this off-cycle request to amend the existing construction funds with this increase. And the idea is that, so we got, like I said, we have the CPC funds and we have a state park grant, which is very good. One of the requirements of the park grant is that those funds be spent by June 30 of 24. So the award is made from July 1 to the end of that fiscal year, which is the following June. So we have that award. We are finishing the plans and specifications. The idea is to put that project out to bid late summer, early fall, have it under construction, start construction this fall, and then have at least the park funds and the required matching funds, the park grant, spent by the end of June. And then I suppose if there are additional unspent funds or the construction is continuing with the portions of the budget which are not park related, then we could continue. If that's clear. So happy to discuss.
Thank you. Are there questions from the committee?
Yeah, I have a question. I remember that we made a change I think we made a change in the funding for this project in this current funding cycle. Is that right, Berta? Did we change there was one of the parks, and I forget if it was this one or a different one, where we changed planning money to construction money because the city had found other planning money.
That was Junction Park.
It was Junction Park. So this one was, so the award we made this year, so previously we made an award for planning, and then this year we allocated $350,000 for construction.
That's correct.
And
Yes, I'm sorry, David, just as backup. The initial reward was to Veteran Services, and then CPC awarded construction funds. We did make a change to those CPC funds with the CPC's approval, where part of those construction funds are being used to fund a portion of the design contract related to construction administration. So that was an adjustment to those funds. Does that sound right, Roberta?
Yeah.
And I was glad, Arne, you acknowledged it. I mean, to me, kind of the elephant in the room is that to me, it's flabbergasting that a park this small could cost this much.
Yeah.
I just can't wrap my mind around how we can spend so much money in this park.
It's amazing. I think that, not to, it's difficult to accept, but I think that whether it's a park or an addition onto your house, you are activating all those vendors and all those scopes of work. So whether you put an addition on your house, and it's a 10-foot by 10-foot addition or a 50-foot by 50-foot addition, you're dealing with many of the same costs in terms of like having the different vendors there and doing it. So we could probably get a larger park for the same money or something similar, but it doesn't change the fact that you've got to pay for everything that we've included, and those costs are high.
Yeah, and it is about, in fact, it's a little bit more than the Brown School. Is that,
It is.
See that right?
It is more than the Brown School. Yes, it's absolutely more. I think that's, if you go back and look at the design, it's a complicated design and a marvelous design. I mean, as a memorial type of park. I mean, we're just with this long curved wall with, that has a dimensional aspect to it with concrete forms depicting, the Henry Hansen on Iwo Jima, and then the other information panels to the right and left, medallions to the different armed services. We're talking about like 20-inch or 24-inch medallions to all the different services. Although there is Space Force is actually one of the services of one of the branches of the military. We are not including a medallion for Space Force because they were not active at the time of Henry Hansen.
I'm glad for that small saving. A question real quick. I noticed that bond overhead and profit is $220,000, and construction administration is a separate item. Now that's different from overhead?
That's correct. Construction administration is provided by the landscape architect. So that's a separate cost. And this goes back to our earlier request. In order for us to get the amendment through for CBA's landscape architecture contract, we had to have a funding source for doing that. And that was why we came back to the CPC earlier to make that change in the construction funds, so we took just a portion of the construction funds which have been allocated, and those were used to amend CBA's design contract. The design contracts always include something for construction administration.
Yeah. So does some of that come back if it's not like the bond? Does that come back if it's not, if they're not, I don't know, sued and need to, or the contingent?
David, it's really difficult to know. I mean, in terms of like how it comes back, it's just, I don't know how a particular vendor's approach will be. So this is an estimate, just a gross estimate. We don't know what their bonding, cost will be or how much profit
I mean, I'm admittedly just going to try to chip away at the edges of this bad number.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I'm just trying to figure out, whether any of this number is, I mean, almost 200,000 is contingency, so maybe that'll all be used, but also perhaps some of that'll not be used.
It is very much an unknown. So this is again just, we've seen costs coming in so high across the board, and this is what we think is reasonable. I think that even with this number, we're still going to have to do some value engineering. We're going to go back, we're going to re-estimate the project, we're going to look at our budget, and if there are things which have to change, then we'll have to change them just to meet this budget. I think it is still a lean budget for the things that were included.
Okay.
So Arn, thank you so much for providing the background information. I do have a quick question, and this is in relation to the memo. Looking at the second page, budget factors for consideration. The second to last bullet, the one that starts with some aspects of construction will not be known until demolition begins. So points well taken. I understand that you may not know what's going on, but what I am concerned about is that this request is for about 412,000, and then there's demolition, and then there's additional costs that may potentially emerge that may exceed what's being requested here. I'd like to get your thoughts on what sort of planning do you have in mind? Do you plan on coming back to the CPC to request additional funds, or are you looking at other funding sources? Just basically your thoughts on that.
I'd like to say that I have a plan B in place. I don't. And I think that you're right to ask those questions, and we're trying to understand the possibilities as well. Henry Hansen has a large slope, and then there's a butter right next to it. The butter has been very involved in the process, and part of the design is to meet the needs of that butter. But the fact that I don't anticipate any problems, and this has not been a built space for a long time. It was a sloped lot before the original Henry Hansen was built. This wasn't a house lot. So I don't anticipate encountering mystery utilities or anything else. It's an unknown.
I understand, and thank you for the response.
If I can, hi Arn, thanks for your time and for the proposal. I just want to make a statement first for my colleagues, just as a clarification of what we're looking at. So, at the start of our meeting tonight, I think this proposal would have represented about 63% of our available funds for open space and recreation this year. And after the last half hour, our last approval, I think it now is up to 74% of our available funds. So this is an out of round request, right? So want to be cognizant of the fact that we'll have in round requests that would be greatly affected by this award. Not casting judgment on that. It's just a fact. And so that brings me to my question, I guess, for Arn about timing. So as I understand it, the urgency and the reason for this out of round proposal is because you're about to go to bid and you're trying to spend the other grant money before next July. Hopefully you can correct me if I'm wrong in just a second. I'm hearing there's concern from you that bids will come in over the funding that is lined up. To me, that sounds like regardless of whether there's an award made, it still could come in significantly over, even if this award is granted as it's proposed. If that's the case, what are your thoughts on getting a number from potential contractors and then working towards it at a potentially later award?
I think it's going back to the conversation that David brought up. I think that it's going to be important for us as the design team to tailor our costs to the budget that we have. That said, I think that would be incredibly difficult with the existing budget. So if we have a larger budget, it'll be easier to incorporate all the elements that CPC and the community have said are appropriate for this space. So that's clearly the reason for our request. And I think that we can, we will work with the landscape architect to ensure that that we can do that. That's the idea. And I think, the landscape architect is on board with that. We know we have to be very careful with those costs, and so we'll be more cautious with our estimating. Our park grant has a fixed schedule. So when they award the park grant, it is just based on that fiscal year. If they don't extend the park grant. You can't go back to the park grant and say, "Can you give us a continuance?" They would be upset if we didn't take it and we didn't spend it, because their response would be, "This is money that we had available that we could have provided to a different community for a different project. We gave it to Somerville based upon your need." So if we didn't do it in this budget cycle, the state will be unhappy. I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not a situation that we want to be in. So, I'm not sure if does that answer your question, Ryan?
I'll really quickly maybe rephrase the last part of it. Is there a construction schedule that works in which this comes back to us as part of the normal round? Maybe you have received bids already. You have a number in mind, a clearer number, but then that gives us the full scope of understanding all of the applicants for open space and recreation funds, and we're better able to prioritize our scarce resources with that knowledge. Does that make sense as a question?
Yes, it does. And the answer is no, simply because we do have to put it out to bid, and we have to be able to move it forward on a schedule. And there's a number of factors. So you couldn't like put it out to bid and then see what bids you got, and then come back to the CPC to relate those costs and then put it in a request. I mean, I don't think a vendor would bid on it, or it's less likely that a vendor would bid on it with that unknown aspect to it, whether the funding was going to be approved or not. And in fact, I have difficulty putting a project out to bid without having the funds in place beforehand. So if I go to the finance department and I say that I want to put a project out to bid, I have to be able to assure them that all of the funds are there beforehand.
Understood. Okay, thank you for that explanation.
I just wanted to share with everyone that I put on the screen what we do anticipate for projects this funding round. Applicants in the regular funding round have already been required to submit their eligibility determination forms. So any projects that have not submitted eligibility determination forms are not in the pipeline for this funding round this year. And so this is later in our agenda, but rather than then, I could go through this quickly now, just so that you can see the full context in which these off-cycle applications are coming in. So if you'll bear with me for a moment, I just am trying to adjust so I can see the screen fully. So we have, this is one of two of four open space and recreation projects this round are coming in as off-cycle applications. That is the Brown Schoolyard and the Henry Hudson. So in addition to that, we're anticipating open space recreation projects, including the Kennedy School Playground and Blessing of the Bay Path construction, where last year we funded design. And so the total amount that's requested with the just from the eligibility determination forms is $893,000. Although that does not include the off-cycle applications that didn't submit eligibility determination forms. So below, I added up what is the estimated request with those off-cycle applications. And for open space and recreation, it's 943,776 compared to available funds of 656,743. In the historic preservation category, we're anticipating $436,053 in applications, including the Somerville Museum's off-cycle application, which we'll hear about shortly. And that compares to $362,413 of available funds. And so utilizing the budgeted reserve to cover the difference, we'd, given the numbers that were shown this evening, be dipping 32,303 into the carried over undesignated funds that are carried over from previous funding years. That is, we don't know for certain. When in the fall, we'll learn whether we receive more than anticipated in the state match, or we'll be able to look more carefully at what other funds are available that were carried over or returned to the CPC from previous years.
So could I just ask something about the spreadsheet? I saw an open space project for groundworks, but I didn't see a number affiliated with it under the EDFs. Is that also in the pipeline possibly?
So they submitted an intent form, but they did not submit an eligibility determination form.
Oh, okay. So that means they're not in the pipeline.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
They inquired early in the year, but they weren't ready to go with the project.
Got it. Thank you.
The question is the reserve amount that she listed, if you could scroll down again, is that from going back to our percentages, the 10% that can be shifted around from category for this particular year?
Yes.
Okay, so we're not even looking.
That we submitted to City Council this year.
Okay. So that doesn't, that's not digging into the overall cumulative. We still have a reserve out there too, which
Correct.
we're not even looking at getting into. Okay.
This amount, the 32,303, would be dipping into the undesignated fund. That's the money that we carry over from previous years.
Okay.
Now, I also want to point out that the column F, the estimated request that's in the eligibility determination form, these numbers are provided, they're just a best guess at this point in time. There isn't any science behind how these figures have been derived. So sometimes the numbers will change before they, when we see the full application and we have the full budget and whatever method was used to provide the actual cost estimates. In fact, there's an example of one that changed, which I should. I didn't update. The original eligibility determination form had 120,000. That doesn't change the total because I had already used the actual rather than the estimated. Any further questions or discussion about this project, or would you like to look at the language for the recommendation?
I have a question, Arn, about whether the city has looked into other funding sources, you know, maybe other veteran groups or so forth that might be interested in helping the city refurbish this park. Oh, you're muted.
Thank you, Duke. That was a good question. In an earlier conversation with the last director of Veteran Services, they said that they would be willing to talk to us about something that they could provide. And they talked about the idea of maybe there are veterans who would be willing to do a fundraisers or something like that, or maybe to help do something. But I think that the bottom line there was that was talk that's very unlikely to go forward. The number of people who were involved in the project from Veteran Services was small. One of the things that the director mentioned was, so the part of the design we were talking about having medallions for the various armed forces. And he said that he would be willing to talk to us about sharing in those costs for those medallions. However, that director of Veteran Services has now left. The city does not have a director of Veteran Services anymore. And I don't have any idea when that position might be filled again.
This is a city position you're talking about?
Yes, yeah.
I would also point out that PSUF has also applied for historic preservation funds for the restoration of the Central Hill campus monuments, which is likewise a military memorial. And I had made a suggestion in my response to the eligibility determination for that project that the city look into state funding for military sites. And so I don't know whether that might also be something that you would consider for Henry Hansen.
I think that, if we were to dial the clock backwards and Veteran Services had been more involved in the project after their initial, flush of energy, then perhaps they could have, pursued some of those avenues. As a PSUF project, I don't see that happening, and I certainly don't see it happening on the schedule that we have in place. I don't know if there are, is there a possibility of some Veterans Services money out there? I can't speak to it. But when Veteran Services was an active office, they did not come forward with anything. The ideas that they suggested were, again, sort of like goodwill gestures. The idea that maybe there would be, donations or something like that. And I didn't get the sense that they were willing to, while they were talked about it, there wasn't any sense of like, yes, we can go do that, or we will do that.
They have to sell a lot of brownies.
A lot of brownies, yeah. Or those little red poppies. I do think that this is, our department typically does not do these types of projects of a memorial. I do think we've got an opportunity here to do something sort of special with this small corner of land and create something that the city will have for a long time. I think that in our conversations with CBA, we've talked about like the permanence of the displays and the materials that we'll use. I think that the design is very good. It's very simple, but it's straightforward. I think it's a very good project.
So,
You know, I was just going to say, Diff, again, you know, PSUP is taking on this project and picking up this project because we do see it as a park space as well. So while it honors veterans, it's also going to be a nice, you know, community space with the plaza and the cafe tables and a place to sit and, you know, a learning experience and educational experience for kids and people who visit the space.
Yeah, well, I do appreciate that. It's a lot of our budget for a very, very small space.
That's correct.
You tend to
I'd be
wonder
happy
what.
to, you know, obviously, should we come in, should we get the right contractor come in to deliver this project under budget, I'm happy to have the same conditions and that, you know, money would be returned. I don't see any problem with that at all.
Is it?
I was a little confused because in my experience with public work for small towns, they would routinely get bids before bringing up to a town vote to decide whether or not to allocate the money for it. Is that just something that doesn't happen in our civic structure here?
So Eric, we typically, in order to like have the budget structure, you know, and to be able to know in advance and plan, you want to start the design process early and have that designer, in our case, you know, some communities do more design in-house, and we typically depend upon landscape architects to provide the majority of the design, and we depend upon them to provide the budgets for the project. And then we use that as a basis for our requests.
I mean, the number does seem comparatively eye-popping compared to the others. I guess looking at the big picture as was presented here, it doesn't seem as though this year we're looking at a huge overage of requests, looking at the three categories together, or two categories really. So its impact on the whole thing is pretty close to a wash, with it digging a small amount into our big reserve. So I guess that's one saving grace there.
Rose.
From my, it is I agree, it's a big chunk of our funds. I don't actually think it's out of line. I mean, it's pretty in line with the with projects that I'm working on. It just is that the costs are the cost. It's expensive.
John?
I'm working on the West Somerville Neighborhood School as well. It's costing me, I have a small parking lot, like 14 spaces. And for me to put some of the court games on that parking lot, which is like a couple of Foursquare games and a hopscotch game, and to do a very, very simple mural on a wall, a one color like line mural on a wall, $15,000. To apply paint on asphalt and a little bit and a small mural on a wood wall, $15,000. I'm just like, that's crazy. We've researched it. I've looked at other options. There are different ways to do this. You know, no, that's the cost of the work. We've just like looked at it, you know, 2 or 3 different ways. It's disturbing.
So
I have to admit, I would feel a lot better if I felt like veterans groups, local or state or national or anything, were partners in this.
Yeah,
Historically, I'm sorry, I think historically, they have been there. So when Veteran Services brought this to CPC, it was after, like a small groundswell from veterans to the city, to veteran services and to city councilors saying that the existing Henry Hansen Park, which was built largely as a temporary park prior to the time that Henry Hansen's mother died, it was a very quick construction. People have been unhappy about the condition, the existing condition of Henry Hansen Park for a very long time. And so that was the reason, to do it in the first place. And there was like a groundswell of people who were pushing for it. I think that since the CPC has provided support for it, I think those people are going like, okay, well, it's happening, it's still coming. Those people were involved in the community meeting process, the earlier community meeting process, and then when the city decided, when PSUF decided to pursue it again, we had another community meeting, and we had that same support from veterans and from some open space advocates as well.
Yeah, so similar to David, I'm also struggling with, I certainly understand and appreciate the need for the park and commemorating Henry Hansen and also veterans. One thing I would like to just raise for my fellow committee members to consider, and Arne, you're certainly welcome to weigh in as well, to the best of your knowledge, of course, is with the rising cost of construction, not just with the two open spaces that we were considering, do we foresee any additional off-cycle requests that are going to come our way where, due to the cost escalation, construction cost escalation, we'll be asked to fund them? And kind of open question to everyone here to see whether that's a consideration as well. Thank you.
I would just, I'm thinking that within PSUF, currently the ongoing projects are Junction Park and Glen Park, aside from the ones that we see here this evening. And the historic preservation projects, we see here this evening the Somerville Museum, and the Elizabeth Peabody House has a discrete project that they have not gone out to bid on yet. So that is a project that has not requested additional funds. The Grace Baptist Church project, the Somerville Hispanic Association, they are underway right now on work that was funded under 3 different grants. So I imagine that if they need to change the scope to push a piece out to the future, they could do that without having to increase the funds that are requested this year. That's what I would anticipate of the projects that I know are ongoing, but perhaps Arne, you might be aware of other projects that I haven't mentioned that could potentially need additional funding this year.
There's also the 217 Somerville Ave project, but we are seeking park grants for that, and we have funding through the CIP anyways, so we're not expecting to come to the CPC at least this year. Maybe at the end of our construction sequence the following year, if any issues arise, maybe we will, but probably nothing this year from 217.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you, John. Really appreciate it.
Is it possible we'd get like a land acquisition request?
I think we always have to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an opportunity that once it arises, we need to jump on it immediately. But so I don't know if there's any kind of in the pipeline though.
I'm thinking about Matignon School, the yard behind it in Ward 7 actually.
Yeah, that's a great spot.
So I think that the committee needs to make a decision whether anyone would like to make a motion to recommend the funding for this project, or if you want to recommend a different amount of funding for the project or take a pass on it. This is
the moment.
your moment to decide what's your action this evening.
Is continuing the discussion an option? You know, like seeing if the city can find partners or alternative sources. You know, come back to us next month.
The next month would be September for the CPC schedule. Next week, you'll be on a hiatus in August.
Mm-hmm.
And when do you plan to go out to bid? Sorry,
You're muted, Arn.
Thank you. I wanted to have an vendor underway this fall. So I wanted to, as soon as I can get the plans done, as soon as CBA has the plans done, I wanted to get it out to bid. So that would be, again, late August, early September in an ideal world.
Okay. And then construction in the spring?
Construction starts this fall. I want to start construction this fall, right? So that's sort of there. In order to be able to spend the park grant funds by June, I want to start construction this fall. Because it means we would start, do the demolition and get some of the initial phases, utility work, et cetera, done this fall. And then if we have a mild winter, we would work through the winter. We were able to do that for a couple of projects in the last season. I don't know if that's possible or not, but I want to make sure we get the project done by the end of the fiscal year. And so that's part of the urgency of this off-cycle request, we just see a limited time frame, and that's the current need.
But if I understand this, you have $725,000 for construction now, right?
That's correct.
So is there anything that's keeping you from going out to bid by your, whenever you want, and then when you get bids and they come in at $1.5 million, you can come back at that point and make the request?
We typically, I'm not saying that can't happen, but typically when you release a bid, you provide a cost estimate, because the contractors are going to respond to that. They want to know how big of a project it is, what's the budget. So that's typically when you put a project out to bid, you include that cost.
But you must have had a budget when you made the initial request for funding from us in this funding cycle, right?
That's correct, David. We did, and again, those costs were based upon prices that we knew from previous projects. So they were historic costs. They were out of date costs, is my opinion. So I think that CBA is a good landscape architecture company. But I'm concerned that because the estimates that we were using were a little dated, that they're not as realistic as they should be.
Hypothetical, what happens if you get your bids and you're $20,000 over or something, and you have to come back to us for more? Will that in itself be a monkey wrench into your getting the project moving on schedule?
That would certainly be a challenge. Yes, that would be a challenge. And so I think that we have to be very careful when we're putting the plans together, that we have really a good understanding of the details of the project, whether it's the details of the wall construction, which are significant in terms of both the engineering and the way the facade will be put together, and the inset granite panels and the medallions and the 3D relief. So I think it's important that the city and CBA really put a magnifying glass on all aspects of the construction.
And is that 20% contingency meant to be a project contingency or construction contingency or
Construction contingency.
okay.
And I think that, when you put a project out to bid, it's typical that you would include ad alternates. So you have items which you say, well, ideally we'd like to include item A. If we can't have item A, then we'll accept item B. So rather than having, for example, if we want to have granite plinths inserted into our wall that have like, photographic etchings or stories, whatever, and the granite comes in as being too expensive, we could have the option of having like some sort of other sign material that would be less expensive and use that as our ad alternate. So there are means of providing some cost options in the project that still meet the intent.
I feel like there's a lot of hesitation because of the big price tag and the small space. I'm wondering a couple of things. Like I kind of want to re-examine Roberta's spreadsheet because that sort of laid it out for us, like what we are putting at, what other projects might be at risk if we allocate all this money. So one thing I want to do is re-examine that. The other thing I'm looking at the budget, and I wonder if there's a way to do this and fund it in phases, or say the memorial elements are it's a pretty big chunk. It's 125K, maybe see if the city could shop that around to the veterans groups and ask the CPC to fund the rest of it. Because again, I feel hesitancy and in myself, and nobody's coming forth. So those are two things I'm thinking right now as we look at this.
I think that, not to be too blunt about it, but I don't think that because there is no director of veteran services, I think it's unlikely that we could get much involvement from veterans without taking that on ourselves and finding out who those groups are and then starting some sort of outreach.
Okay.
I don't think that there's the time to do that with the schedule we have.
Laura, I really appreciate what you just said. So I'm going to try to, jumping off that, try to summarize and maybe propose a plan of action here. So if the immediate goal is to get funding that can support a potential budget for this to go out to bid, right? Because I understand that's the urgency, is having a number that you can go out to bid with, that you can feel like you have in your pocket. We don't know what's going to come back. We don't actually know if these estimates are correct. And there's, as you said, a 20% contingency on this. So there's so many unknowns, but the goal right now is to get a number that you can take out to bid. So given that the total cost on here is listed right now without contingency as $947,000, I'd be interested in hearing what my colleagues think about getting this project to $947,000 in the immediate term. With, obviously, we can talk at a later date about the full request amount, but to get, with the sources that have already been granted, to get to 947,000 would be 221 roughly. So I think that's a little less than half of the request. I'll stop there. Is that compelling to anyone? Does that allay any fears?
Ryan, I'm really glad you said that, because I was just kind of going down a similar path in my own mind about, how do we get from the amount that we currently have allocated to something that's, maybe more realistic, that, like Arn is looking for, but maybe isn't so far from the 725. It's not the 725 plus the 200 plus a whole nother 200, kind of slush fund. And what I was trying to figure out while I was thinking this through is whether you even advertise a contingency in an RFP. I mean, when you put an RFP out, do you tell them, by the way, we've got another 200,000 you can spend?
No,
I mean,
no,
you wouldn't advertise that anyway.
No, but we would reduce if we advertise it, we would reduce the advertised costs significantly so that we have that, whatever that 20% contingency is. We
Yeah,
would take that off the top.
but in this case, if you actually needed the contingency, you'd then probably have to come back to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So my concern here is that, I mean, the design was for a certain quality of space. So we can develop a design. I mean, we have a design already, and we can adapt the design. We can budget it down. We can make it simpler. But if you're trying to have a nice space, truly nice space that feels historic and feels like a memorial, and is not, I don't want to just have like concrete surfacing and a concrete wall with plastic memorials on it. I can do that. I can still deliver a park that has, very, simple features, but it won't be the same park. It won't have the same quality of elements. It won't have, the granite whether it's metal inlays or whatever it is that was intended for this space. So I don't want, I'm not saying that we can't do it, because it probably could. I don't know. I don't know.
But I'm not sure that's what we're suggesting at this point. I don't think that we're suggesting that you change the description of the final project. I think we're kind of saying we approve it without the contingency. And then if they come in and they say, we can't possibly give you plaques that nice, for this price, then we've got something to talk about.
My position is that I can't go out to bid for one price, and then I need to have my budget established when I go out to bid, right? So I can't wait for bids to come in and then see what they are, and then go out for additional funding, especially given the fact that once the CPC approves the money, it then has to go to City Council. So you see there's like a natural delay in that schedule. I know that CPC is in a difficult position. I completely understand that. But I think that in terms of my request, I think that this is realistic. I appreciate that you have a budget to protect, and that there's competing projects out there as well, and those projects are all valuable. But we do know that the CPC sponsored this project twice, wanted to move forward. It's scheduled. It has a state park grant. It's intended to go forward on this schedule. There are other unknowns in front of the CPC in terms of the schedule and potential cost of other projects, and I can't speak to those, but they are still unknowns at this point. This project is more of a known in terms of what the expectations are in the schedule. So my position is that I would want to advocate for the full request.
And if you can't get the full request, then what's your backup position?
I will take elements out of the design. We are good designers. I'm not saying that we're not going to create something that isn't appealing. It just won't be the same thing.
So, Arn, just for our education, and I'm sorry if you already explained this, but so if the funds, if we do award, if the CPC awards the full request, and the full amount isn't needed, does that go back? How does that end up getting adjusted with the
The
city?
money that you, excuse me, just, and Roberta can speak to this as well. But a PO is created to fund the project. When the PO is not fully spent, right? Well, it can work a number of ways, but yes, the money would be returned to CPC.
Automatically, if a project is completed under budget, then the remaining funds go back to the reserve from which they were first awarded. I did include the requested, even though that is an automatic condition, I included that in the condition for the Brown School because you specified that they were contingency funds, and I thought that that was valuable to continue to make sure that the CPA grant was specified toward the contingency as had been requested. And in this case, that's not directly applicable because what's being requested is much more than the contingency.
It is, but this is, and the advantage of the Brown was that we have more known costs because the construction had started. And with this, it's more of an unknown. And so it's important that you have that contingency so that you have some room to figure out the design. And yes, we would certainly return, whatever unspent costs there are. In the case of the Healy Tot lot, CPC awarded funds to us, and we completed that project under budget. And so we still have a remaining expense over there before those funds are returned, but there will be a chunk of funds returned to the CPC from the Healy Tot lot. And I think that's going to be in like the $30,000 to $40,000 range, return funds from that project.
Could we include some condition that we give the full amount that was asked of in this meeting, but then once you receive all your bids and a contractor is selected, if that contingency is not needed in the fall, that would be returned to the CPC so that we could allocate that to our other projects, and then have a condition that says if any unforeseen contingencies come up during your construction project, that you're allowed to come back to the CPC for an off-cycle request for any additional funds, and we can review that at that time.
In theory, that's an idea, but then it's a question of just schedule and the time that it takes to make those funds available. So, and that's the position we're in with the Brown Schoolyard now. So I have an urgent need for funds to keep that project moving. So I'm looking, that's why came back to the CPC with that request, because we went through our budget very quickly because of the unanticipated items. Again, with what we thought was a pretty straightforward project.
Does anyone else have thoughts about Ryan's proposal?
It seems in theory, I mean, I imagine if your budget came in, your bids, and you're $20,000 over budget, you would first reduce your contingency before you go and do any redesign, or you rely on your alternates, deduct or add alternates or something like that. Before you'd come back to us, you'd say, okay, we're going to reduce our contingency to 16% and go forward with the project. That's probably the rational way to go forward, I would think.
I think so. The contingency that I've included is my budget contingency. It's not necessarily the construction contingency. So it's a contingency I'm allowing for real unknowns in terms of what those design costs, what those costs will be. They remain the unknowns. When the project starts, the contingency could be less. We would just have to be very careful about what that percentage that is. Again, in the case of the Brown School, we had a very small contingency and that got us in trouble.
So I guess that's where I was kind of taking the point that was just made, is there might be a point after you get bids where you say, okay, we didn't need the whole 20, let's reduce that contingency to 10% or whatever for the project and kick back a little bit to the pool in time to dole it out to other projects if need be.
It's very difficult to know. I wish I could tell you guys, that this is going to work on a smaller budget, but it is an unknown. And so we're trying to, the purpose here is to like come in with the best budget that we can based upon the market and the cost that we've seen and the high construction costs that we're dealing with. So it is a big number and it's a smaller space, but this is the reality of the construction market right now. Maybe prices will come down. Maybe we'll get good bids, but it is an unknown. So we're trying to just be prepared before we go into the cycle.
And I guess looking at the big picture, to me, we're still looking at an overall budget that's not so far over what we see our costs coming in. So this is a project that we supported at some point, and I still think it's a good idea to have this in principle. And while the number is high, looking at the figures that were given in the spreadsheet, we're not looking at something that blows a huge hole in our overall allotment for this year. So it feels like maybe money that it's a lot of money to spend on it, but it's not really precluding us from doing a whole lot else at this point. For that reason, I guess I probably lean towards ultimately being in favor of something of this sort, perhaps with some sort of contingency that we fiddle with the contingency once you get prices in, so we can say, all right, we got numbers in, we're within our budget, so let's cut back on that. Hope that you don't discover asbestos or something underneath it.
I wish you didn't say that.
Well, you never know.
I would be happy to, once we have our bids in and we know where the costs are going, that will give us a much better understanding of the overall project costs. I mean, if it's helpful to come back to the CPC after we have, our construction bids, or at some point after the initial phase of work is started and we have a better sense of how it's going to go, I'd be happy to come back and, report and then talk about whether there's funds that could be returned.
I also wonder if have we ever been in a situation where we've done an up to award where we know what our cap is, but the award is actually based on what the budget, the ultimate project budget, as presented by you, Arn, based on the bids, based on the final bids. Is that, I don't know that we have I don't know, Roberta, have we done something like that?
Rose, I think that's more of a language and a conditions thing. I mean, you still be able to designate a specific amount of money to pass on to city council.
Right, it's an up to amount, and what we would rely on, I mean, you would draw down the funds based on the application for payment that you end up with.
But isn't that what this already is? I mean, no matter what, because if they come in under budget, we get it back. So I'm not really sure.
It's not even that we get it back. It's that we don't disperse it. It doesn't get dispersed. It's an award, but it doesn't get, it's all done on a requisition basis, right? So we only disperse what.
You're talking about parceling now.
We would have to, either way, we would have to reserve that money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we're going to, not recognize that money as being available until it's it's spent or released.
That's right.
So it could conceivably help us next year by having more money roll over, but maybe not in an availability manner, as Roberta was saying.
Okay. So where
Need to make a decision at some point and move on, I guess.
I think we do. We're running out of time. So do we have is I guess this is the question is are we ready to recommend to make a motion to support this? The maximum.
So is there a motion to recommend $411,776 from the open space reserve to expand the budget for Henry Henson's construction?
Can I make a motion as the chair, or am I not supposed to do that? Oh,
You're not
I
supposed to
can
do
motion. I motion to recommend $411,776 from the Open Space and Recreation Reserve for the Henry Hansen Park.
May I speak for a second, John? Given that you are public space urban forestry, part of the department that will be running the project.
We have this
Yeah,
conversation a few times.
Very good.
Still not entirely sure, but Roberto's okay with me motioning. I will motion.
I am. If you're an agent of the city in one context, you're still an agent of the city in another context. And so there's not a conflict of interest to vote on a city project or, as a city employee.
We add conditions, are we required to list those in the initial motion, or is it a two-step process?
We usually make it a two-step process. And my apologies, my keyboard abruptly stopped working. So I had at one point started to try to wordsmith a fourth condition. And at this point, I would not include the fourth condition. I don't think there's a way to phrase it, but I can't get rid of it. There, I greened it out. Ignore the green part, but I can't delete or add text at the moment.
So wouldn't the condition be that we are going to return any unspent funds to the CPC? Isn't that what number 4 was going to say?
Something to that effect, and it's an automatic condition anyway.
Is there any attempt to put into writing what we discussed regarding revisiting the contingency, or is that too complicated to parse out here?
That's what I felt would be complicated. I don't know whether you'd be comfortable just making an informal request that PSUF come back and offer to return funds if the bids come under the budget. In fact, just a quick story, that's actually what happened the first time with the Henry Hansen Park, was that the design bids came under the amount that had been allocated for design, and funds were returned because it was under budget. But then the unforeseen circumstance was that the project got put on hold for several years. And by the time it was resurrected, then it required more funds to be able to finish the project. but that was what they had chosen to do, was to return the funds before the project was completed because the bids came in under budget.
That was a decision made by Veteran Services.
All right, so we have a motion with a second. Do I have a second on it? I don't remember.
I don't think there was a second.
I think we had a second.
There was a question.
I will second John's motion.
All right, then I will call the roll. John,
Yes.
Rose,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Laura,
Yes.
David,
No.
Ryan,
Yes.
Jahan.
No.
Right, thank you. The motion passes 5-2. And then the question is whether to include these conditions, to modify or add any conditions.
Can I ask a question about that? Is there, so if the vote is no, is that, how does that vote? How do those folks vote on the question about the conditions?
That's a separate motion. So the we're asking for someone to make a motion to accept the conditions as written, or to modify the conditions and accept those conditions.
Okay.
And then anyone can vote on those. It doesn't matter if how you voted in the first motion. You can vote differently or the same in the second motion.
So it's only a vote on the conditions.
Yes, this is currently just a vote on the conditions.
I would move that we adopt the conditions as listed. Roberta here adding a number fourth, that was sort of a boilerplate provision that unused funds be returned for use by the CPC for other purposes, or however we phrase that.
I'll second that.
Okay.
That makes sense. I mean, did we just do that in the previous one?
We did. I'll use the same, but I'll take out the word contingency. All right, so we had a motion by Eric, seconded by Laura. I'm going to call the roll again. John?
Yes.
Rose?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
And Jahan?
Yes.
Great, thank you. The motion passes. So my apologies, we've got another off-cycle application on our agenda this evening. I would invite Barbara Mangum to join us and give a very brief explanation about background about your request for the museum.
Yeah,
And
just Barbara, just excuse me for a minute. I just wanted to say thank you very much. I appreciate your consideration. I know that was, and I appreciate your time. I know that we're running long. I'd be happy to come back to the CPC in the fall. We want to just review any of the budgets. All right, thank you.
Yeah, Arn, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Arn.
Barbara.
You're mute.
Oh, is she muted? Do we need to?
Should be able to unmute herself. Can you find the button to unmute? Do you see a panel on the right-hand side of your screen that has a list of attendees?
You may have to push the little arrow to expand it up in the top right.
So there should be a list of things: audience view, sharing, webcam, audio, dashboard, and then attendees. And if you click on attendees, it will drop down and show you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Yeah, no, for some reason that whole Windows just went away, but I was able to do it at the tab at the top. So thank you very much for allowing me to come before you tonight. I am coming as the president of the board of the trustees of the Somerville Museum. I'm a volunteer, though I almost live there. And I am requesting $98,053 to help balance our budget, well, to balance it so that I can pay stack construction and other costs associated with the project, which we call the Access for All and More Phase 2 project, which was renovation of collection storage. So it's been for historic preservation of the collections, the historic collections owned by the museum. So I had given you some background information that I am sure Roberta passed on to you in terms of a spreadsheet of how costs have grown. And also there was another addition which was showing change orders since the last time I came before you all. We had a similar situation to what Arn was talking about, where in 2021, I think we had gotten the costs and did a CPA application based on those. Then once we were awarded 157,352. Then after that, when we did go out for bid, it came back much, much higher. And we had to come back and ask for another 100,000. So then we had 257,000 from the CPA for this project. And we had another 140,000 from the Massachusetts Cultural Facility Fund. And that's in order to, this is a small project. So although we did have a contingency in there, we did blow through it as we got the multiple change orders. And so we had basically 81,000 in change orders. We're coming to the end of the project. It's been substantially completed, but the most recent thing, we still have people to pay. And so we don't have that 81,000 since we are a museum and basically, have to raise everything through donations and of course the CPA and other kinds of organizations like this. So basically, we had both the change orders and then now we have a pending change order, which after again listening to Arn, I'm really concerned may blossom into much more money than I am anticipating. Right now, it's I'm going to go into it. It's a little bit complicated. It has to do with the 140,000 that we were awarded from the Mass Culture Facility Fund toward this project. And we applied to the MHC for a as a notification and project notification. That project notification was in addition to the project notification we had done with the Sarah White and the Historic Preservation Commission in Somerville. So in May of 2022, we went before the Historic Preservation Commission and we asked for 4 historic windows to be, we actually gave them the choice of being kept in place, but you know, we would have to waterproof them and do other kinds of things, or to be bricked up. And actually, the decision was made to brick them up at the time and take the windows out. This made it much better for us in terms of, I'm an art conservator. When I look at the collection storage area for the museum, I want to see a place that's completely waterproofed and climate controlled. And so the removal of the windows was very helpful in that way. However, when MHC looked at the project later, they didn't look at it until April of this year. They found, in particular, one person decided he did not like the bricked in windows. And he said, nope, if you're, you know, essentially, if you want to work with me, you have to come up with a way to put those windows back. So the windows themselves, of course, are long gone. So we're looking at buying windows that are very similar. These are basement hopper windows. They're not anything too fancy. They're basically 4 divided lights in a single frame. They're apparently available as an item that can be bought off the shelf. However, we do need to remove all the brick that was put in. And of course, we have to be very careful with the masonry so that, you know, we preserve as much as we can of the original masonry. And then we have to waterproof everything that goes in because we're removing the brick, and we're also removing CMUs, so cement units, that concrete block units that were put in there as well for structural stability. Those we're basically going to try to grind down until they're fairly thin. And then again, we'll be putting in flashing and putting in these new windows, and then, you know, buttoning that up, painting and doing everything else so that they look as if they are the original windows. When we were doing that project, the architect looked at the other project, the other windows that we have. We have 4 others that are original, and found that those were in very, very poor condition. And so we want to put them all together now. So it's like 3 replacement windows and 4 that are going to be repaired, restored, and do them as a group. We don't have a cost estimate right now. We're working with Stack on that, and they are, everyone's away, and our architect's having a baby. So we have lots of things to delay us at this moment, but we hope to have those costs very soon. But I have estimated them based on other costs that we've had with this project. I estimated them at about $32,000. And then I put in a 20% contingency of 6,000 on that. I have not put in any other contingency money because at this point, most of the work is done. We're doing punch, you know, line items. So I came up with this at, you know, 38,000 to add in there. It's very scary because, like I say, when I looked at the punch list items, I've actually gone back and disputed some of the costs with Stack, even though they're very good. We like working with them. They've done a great job, but the costs are just incredibly high. So for a contractor to be with us, it's over $1,000 a day. So not knowing exactly how long this project is going to take, I'm hopeful that that's going to be enough money. So that's why I'm asking for the 98,000. If it goes over at this point, the museum is still actively fundraising for the Access for All and More project. We hope that we can raise any other funds that are needed, but I'll tell you, we're at the end of 2 years, really 3 years of a active capital campaign, and the easy money's gone. So it gets harder and harder to find people who are willing to donate, especially significant amounts of money. We get many wonderful people donating smaller amounts. So for all those reasons, that's why I'm asking you to, you know, generously help us out and give us this remaining 98,000 so that we can finish the project, go ahead, get the window projects specified and bid out and done before winter, while we still have Stack on the project, which is our contractor. Do you have any questions? Probably everyone's very tired. Yes.
Rose.
Will you just say, tell us again about the timing of the bid, when you get when you're going to get you have a real estimate, a final
Right.
estimate of everything?
So Stack has an estimator who does this kind of work. So we've already been working with our architect to come up with the specifications for the project. Not necessarily, unfortunately, but the person we've been dealing with most, whose name is Vikram Kumar, has gone back to India for a month, so he will not be back until the end of August. And so he was able to get it into their pipeline so that they have an estimator who is coming out and looking at the project and giving us an estimate. But she has to then contact all the subs and get the estimates from them. So we're looking at September, I think, for getting the estimate from Stack, and it would probably be late September.
Mm-hmm.
But our goal is to just, try to then plow through and get it done before like mid-November.
Okay. I'm just wondering if there is a downside to this getting postponed to the September round, to our next September meeting.
Oh, well, I'm definitely hoping that you can decide on it tonight, because we really need the money, because, we have all these people to pay and we don't have the money right now. So we're basically short $100,000. And we've been paying Stack from other sources of money that we have, but it's, it's kind of borrowing against money that we've raised, for instance, to pay Gentle Giant for the work that they're doing, which is not a CPA project, but it's involved with bringing the collections back. So, we will have spent $57,000 on that by the time we're done with this project. So we have a lot of other people that we have to pay, architects, engineers, things like that. So, it's a short project, so
Yeah.
there's not a lot of time for things.
Oh, so maybe I just didn't quite follow. So the window, it's not for the CPC funding, isn't for the windows.
No, that's a portion of it that goes into the calculation, but that's 38,000 of the 98 that I'm asking for.
Okay.
The other money, basically there's 81,000 of these change orders, and that's not including the windows. Okay, so that's just 81. If you were to include that and the potential change order, we'd be looking at like 120,000 or more. And so the museum has been able to do some fundraising against that. So we're happy to do that, but we at this point, we just we're trying our hardest and we cannot do more.
Okay. Any other questions?
Really? So as the Historic Commission person here, I'm amused that they actually want you to bring back the windows that we thought were so minimally visible that it's to not really matter. But
yes, exactly.
And what portion of this number is the result of that particular requirement that you bring back those 3 X number windows?
Well, that's what I'm saying, and I've done that estimate at 38,000.
Oh, that's 38. That's just that, not the restoration
I
part.
don't believe it's going to be lower than that. If anything, I think it's going to be higher. So
That includes those windows plus the restoration of the other existing windows?
Yes, that would be
Okay.
all of them. 7 windows.
So it's those, so it's the, what is that? So it's the 7 windows total or 11 windows?
It's 7 windows total. So
That's
it's
the
bringing back 3 are being restored basically back. And then 4 are being actually repaired in place if possible. And if they're just too rotted, they'll be replaced. But they'll be replaced in kind, you know, and we're going before the Historic Preservation Commission again for those, for you know, certificate of appropriateness. But again, that's basically, it's the 81,000 in change orders. That is my concern right now. And then, you know, I have a budget, look at the budget, I see how much we're going to be in arrears, you know, with any of the money that we have raised, you know, from private citizens, et cetera. And this is the number that I came up with based on my assumptions.
And as you said, some portion of what you're requesting has already been incurred already as an expense.
60,000, well, actually, the whole 81,000 has now been incurred. That 81,000 of change orders has already been done. The
Oh, right.
project is substantially complete, and we're dealing with punch items now. Punch items.
Maybe I'm confused because, like, as you pointed out, I'm kind of tired. Well, so what's the relationship between the 98,000 that you need for the windows and the 81,000 in the?
So the 98,000 is not just for the windows. What is needed is for the entire, this is all still part of phase 2 renovation of the museum's historic collection storage. So, you know, in 2022, we got a grant from CPC awarded us money toward this project. And that was not just a window project, that was a project really to take a section of the museum in its basement that had been very moldy and terrible for the collection, and to renovate it into proper high quality museum storage. And so that was undertaken with the money that we got from, you know, the CPC, and also with the money that we got from Mass Historic Commission via Mass Cultural Council. It's a mouthful. But so together we thought we had enough money, you know, to go forward with the project. So just as Arn was saying, we wanted to go forward when you've got the money. And so, but then as we undertook the project, the cost came in higher. And then the most recent, they actually have been working basically from January until about May on the main renovation of this space. They've come up, we've experienced $81,000 in additional change orders. So that's the money that we did not have. And so we've, you know, again, we had raised maybe 30,000 of that, but we were not able to do the whole thing, plus then undertake this other project, which we're required to undertake in order to get the 140,000. Maybe I didn't make that really clear. So the MHC, Mass Cultural Council Facility Fund, when they gave us the award for 140,000, it was subject to review by MHC. It was actually project notification. So we undertook the project notification, but we really had no idea that they were not going to go along with what the Somerville Historic Preservation Commission had already said was fine. And so when they came through, they said, and like I say, it was specifically one person there who said that we would have to restore the windows if we wanted to get that 140,000. So it's on that basis. It's almost like a preservation deed restriction that we need to then go ahead and do these windows to fulfill our promise, basically, to the MHC. So does everyone understand? I feel like there's a lot of confusion about what I'm asking for. The 100,000 or 98,000 is basically for us to pay the contractors, the architects, the engineers, and part of that will go toward the window restoration.
Makes sense to me. So it's the 80 something plus the window portion minus what you've raised already. The
Right.
net is 90.
So
And we-
unfortunately,
Oh,
due
go
to
ahead.
my computer not keyboard not working for the rest of tonight, I can't share with the committee that preview of what the recommendation would include. So what we would be looking for the committee members, if you're inclined this evening, is a motion to recommend a grant of $98,000 and $98,053 as is shown in the I'm going to share this figure that's shown in the model, the list of all of the projects for this funding round. So the first vote would be to recommend this amount if someone wants to make a motion.
I'll make a motion that we recommend the funding the $98,053.
And that would come from the Historic Preservation Reserve.
And we have the money to, does that cause problems?
No, I'll note that while I think there is some confusion over the exact use of the CPA dollars coming in, just given the fungibility of the money and the budget that we were sent, I feel that all of the expenses in that budget that we've talked about are eligible. So for that reason, I would second the motion.
Then I will call the roll. Rose?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Jahan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Passes. All right, and so then the second matter would be regarding the conditions. And my question would be whether to if someone would want to make a motion to adopt the 3 conditions shown here. Or if you'd like to make any modifications to this.
Is this a modification of the existing?
Yes, it is. So these,
So are they
and
already,
this is, yeah.
so I think you know where I'm going. So I mean, I'm trying to figure. So there's a standalone funding document which should have the same conditions as the original award, or does it fall under the original award conditions?
I think that this standalone funding would have its own conditions.
Okay.
And I think that the original award was made before we added the, so they are already subject to requiring a sign. And we know that they're already only for eligible expenses, and the must be initiated within 3 years is not a concern because this is a project that's already expended the funds.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's possible that you don't need to apply any conditions on this.
I mean, I don't know that I see harm in doing it, and it's probably a good practice for us to do so. I was thinking more if it was a modification of an existing one, and it was already in the existing one. You know, is it redundant? But I have no objection to including these conditions and essentially in all of our awards going forward.
Well, if that's the case, then I would make a motion that we adopt these conditions.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Okay, then I will call the roll. Rose,
Yes.
Eric, Laura,
Yes.
Jahan,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Ryan.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you all so very much. I just invite you to the museum to see the space. And I think it's going to be something you're just going to be very, very proud of and people will use, and it'll be a real asset to Somerville. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Good work, Barbara.
Hey.
Thank you.
Roberta,
All
I know
right.
we still have items on the agenda, but I also know that it's getting really late. Is there stuff that we can decide to bump to September?
This is what I recommend we do. Just quickly, I'll talk through all of these items and we don't even need discussion about the rest of them. So there was just some information that I had included in the meeting packets for your information that includes the administrative budget, which is really standard, but I've given it to you because it says in our committee procedures that were developed years ago that that the administrative budget would be provided to the committee members every year at the beginning of the fiscal year, just so that you know how it's being spent. And the most interesting thing in the administrative budget is to see the amount. If I'm recalling from memory, it was something like 80,000 or 90,000 of unspent administrative funds last year are going to be carried over in the undesignated fund this year. So that's part of how the undesignated fund grows or is replenished every year. So you can take a look at that if you're interested in seeing more of how the funds were spent last year and how we budgeted them this year. And I wanted to also bring up quickly the fact that committee member and officer terms. Now is a time to talk about the committee member and officer terms so that we can anticipate and start working on any changes that we need to make going forward. In particular, well, first of all, I would appreciate if any committee members plan on stepping down, especially, you know, at the beginning of the year. Please let me know as soon as possible so that we can start working on finding a replacement for you. And we don't have anyone who is terming out this year. So, but if anybody is voluntarily intending to step down, please let me know. But more importantly, Rose and Heather Highmark are both in the second year of their officer terms. So they will be terming out as officers. So that means that we will need to elect new officers this December from someone else in the committee who's not currently serving as officers. So I'd like all of the rest of you to think about whether you might take on serving as officers. Typically, aside from helping to lead the meetings and keep the meetings running on track, which is what the chair typically takes on, and leading discussion within the meetings, I meet with the officers once a month for a half hour or a 1 hour meeting every month to go over the agenda in advance. And sometimes we'll confer with officers occasionally if there's a quick decision that needs to be made that may not need to come to the whole committee, but I just want to defer to committee members. I will sometimes reach out. So that's the extent of the responsibilities for officers, and would like to invite you all to think about potentially stepping up to serve this December for a 1-year term next year. The only other business that I wanted to mention, first of all, the city is going to be moving us to a Zoom platform instead of GoToMeeting. Hopefully by our September meeting, we may be able to, if not September, then October. But I'm hoping that it will be our September meeting. We can be on Zoom and it will be much easier for all of us. But finally, I will send out again the sign-up sheet for our summer and fall outreach events. Many of you still haven't signed up for any of the events coming up. There are several opportunities to table, and I am working on trying to develop some new materials and freshen the materials that we have. So yeah, I will send that out tomorrow, an editable version of the sign-up sheet so that you can take a look at that. That's all that I have for this evening. So I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make it. I move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
All right, and I will call the roll. Rose?
Yeah.
Eric?
Yes.
Laura?
Yes.
Jahan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Ryan?
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks, folks.
Everyone, see you in September.
Good night. all.
Yes.
Good night. Yes, see you in September.
No, we'll see you at the summer outreach programs.
That's true, yes.
Take care.
Bye-bye.